Trump wields a more powerful weapon than tariffs for trade war. President Donald Trump's trade war against China has so far focused on attacking imports. His new front weapon, the Trump administration is seeking to choke off Beijing's access to by limiting the sale of vital U.S. components to China's Huawei Technologies Co. The U.S. the moves are part of a bigger effort by the U.S. to expand and toughen the export control regime that for decades has curbed the sale of defense-related technologies to rogue regimes and strategic rivals. It's a process that, in closed-door deliberations, the administration, since last year, has been discussing with companies and industry groups how to update and redefine the products on the Commerce Department's export control list, a process that is expected to gel in the coming weeks. Administration hawks are pushing for broad definitions to restrict exports related to technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, and 3D printing that they call essential to competitiveness. The new regulation, trade war may cost $600 billion, Harris who pays Bloomberg Economics. That fits with the Trump administration's mantra that economic security is national security. So far on Thursday, Trump described as very. Some U.S. businesses fear the export controls more than tariffs. Companies like in a written submission to Commerce, Microsoft warned that the proposed restrictions risked isolating the U.S. from international research collaborations behind the development of many technologies, and that done wrongly, a new regime could thwart U.S. interests. Artificial intelligence is a very broad concept, GE cautioned in its own submission. Defined too broad, behind the fear expressed by American companies is a concern that a normally balanced debate to update the list of restricted exports could be dragged into a trade war between the world's two biggest economies, increasingly being guided by hawks in the administration. Congress last year passed a law pushed by the White House ordering Commerce to update its export control regime to include emerging and foundational technologies. The discussions over the changes are ongoing and the administration will likely publish new regulations on emerging technologies in the summer. The debate over how sweeping export restrictions should be has always been a tug-of-war between a Commerce Department in charge of promoting exports and the more hawkish Defense Department. But people familiar, a Commerce spokeswoman declined to address specific questions about the export control review but said the department was working with U.S. businesses, academia, and other agencies. The U.S.'s export control system has for years targeted things like fissile material, communications, and cybersecurity equipment, lasers, and even space vehicles. The 14 categories. According to a person briefed on the discussions, the administration has since narrowed its focus to 3 emerging technologies: artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and sensing advances and technologies like 3D printing. But the process has also led to fractures within the Commerce Department and battles between career staff and political appointees, according to people familiar with the deliberations. Several officials, Bill Reinsch, who oversaw the U.S. export control regime in the Clinton administration, said striking the right balance to protect national security while not stifling innovation is a hard task. It's always tricky to get export controls right. Too lax, and the actions against Huawei illustrate the power of the U.S. export control regime. They also illustrate already the moves have had a significant impact on the shares and business models of Huawei suppliers in the U.S. like Qualcomm and other chip makers. And that could be just. In a report published this month, researchers at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation warned that a crackdown on U.S. tech exports would put as much as $56 billion in exports and 74,000 jobs at risk over 5 years. They also warned, a more effective strategy is to say what is the next generation of advanced technologies and what is required for them to be produced in the United States, said Stephen Ezel, one of the report's authors. The administration